The night was colder than usual, the kind of night where every breath you take turns into a cloud that quickly disappears into the darkness. The streets were quiet, except for the faint hum of a bus engine echoing from far down the road. Marcus pulled his worn jacket tighter around him, clutching the small backpack that held everything important to him. His work clothes, a few books, and the lunch he had packed for tomorrow. He had been on his feet all day, moving boxes at the warehouse, and all he wanted was to catch the last night bus home, get some rest, and start it all over again in the morning. Missing that bus wasn't an option for him. If he didn't make it, he would be walking miles through the cold or paying for a cab he couldn't afford. But as he rounded the corner near the bus stop, something caught his eye. A car was parked on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking weakly in the night. Beside it stood an older man, hunched and struggling with something near the back tire. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion as he fumbled with the tools in his hand. Marcus slowed down. He glanced down the street and saw the faint headlights of the bus approaching, and his heart skipped. This was his chance to make it home on time, to get the rest he needed to keep everything on track. For a brief second, he thought about ignoring it, just walking past and letting the man figure it out himself. After all, people passed each other all the time without stopping. But something in Marcus's chest didn't let him move on. Maybe it was the way the old man's hands trembled as he bent down. Maybe it was the loneliness in the way he stood there on the side of the road. Whatever it was, Marcus stopped, torn between catching his bus and helping a stranger who looked like he needed more than just a spare tire. The bus rolled closer, its lights reflecting on the wet pavement. Marcus could hear the soft hiss of its brakes as it slowed down near the stop. His feet itched to run, to wave his hand, and climb inside before the doors closed. But then the old man dropped a wrench, and it clattered loudly against the ground. That sound made Marcus's decision for him. He sighed, adjusted his backpack, and jogged over to the man. "Hey sir, you need some help?" Marcus asked, his breath visible in the night air. The old man looked up, surprised. His glasses were fogged, and his coat looked too thin for the cold. I don't want to trouble you," he muttered, clearly embarrassed. "The tire, it just gave out, and my hands aren't as strong as they used to be." Marcus smiled gently. "Don't worry about it. Let me handle it. You just stand back and stay warm." The bus roared past just then, its headlights sweeping over Marcus's face before disappearing down the road. His stomach sank, but he forced himself not to look back. He knew what he had given up, but for some reason, it didn't feel like a mistake. The tire was stubborn, the lug nuts rusty and difficult to loosen. Marcus's hands quickly became dirty, his fingers aching from the cold metal. The old man hovered nearby, mumbling apologies over and over, clearly uneasy that a stranger was helping him. "You should have caught that bus," he said softly. "I saw you glance at it. I can manage somehow." But Marcus only shook his head. "Some things are more important," he replied. Those words hung in the air, heavier than either of them realized. Finally, after several minutes of struggle, Marcus managed to get the spare tire on. He wiped his hands on his jacket, ignoring the smudges it left behind, and stood up, breathing heavily but satisfied. The old man stared at him, almost as if he couldn't believe a stranger would go out of his way like that. "You didn't have to do this," the man said, his voice trembling, not just from the cold but from something deeper. "Gratitude. You don't even know me." Marcus shrugged, brushing the dirt from his palms. "Doesn't matter. You needed help and I could give it. That's all that counts." The old man's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer, almost studying him. Then he nodded slowly. "You remind me of someone I used to know. The world could use more people like you." Marcus gave a faint smile, but inside he couldn't ignore the nagging thought of the long walk ahead. The bus was gone, and with it, the easy ride home. His shift at the warehouse tomorrow would be even harder without sleep, and the walk alone through the dark streets was the last thing he wanted. But still, as he glanced at the older man's grateful face, he felt a quiet sense of peace. The man insisted on giving Marcus a ride, But Marcus shook his head politely. "I'll manage," he said. "Really?" He didn't want to inconvenience him any more than he already had. So he slung his backpack over his shoulder and began walking into the night. What Marcus didn't know was that the decision he made, to miss his bus to stop and help, was going to change the course of his life. That old man with the flat tire wasn't just a tired traveler or some random stranger on the side of the road. Behind that wrinkled face and worn-out coat was a story far bigger than Marcus could imagine. A story of power, wealth, and influence, hidden behind a simple car on a cold night. Marcus walked away that evening thinking he had lost something. A ride home, a few hours of rest, but he was about to gain far more than he ever thought possible. The old man watched him go, a thoughtful look crossing his face, as if he already knew the future was about to take an unexpected turn. By the time Marcus finally reached home, his feet sore and his body heavy with exhaustion, he had no idea that the stranger he had helped would soon be looking for him. Not because of the flat tire, but because he had seen something rare in Marcus: character, kindness, and honesty in a world that often looked the other way. And before long, their paths would cross again. But this time, Marcus wouldn't just be a man walking home in the cold night. He would be standing face to face with a powerful figure whose true identity was about to turn everything upside down. The night had seemed ordinary, just another struggle in Marcus's simple life. But what he didn't know was that missing that bus wasn't the end of his plans. It was the beginning of a story he never saw coming. And that story was only just starting to unfold. Marcus woke up the next morning with an ache in his legs that reminded him of the long walk home. The cold still lingered in his bones, and though his small apartment offered little comfort, it was enough. He rubbed his tired eyes, sat up on the worn mattress, and thought about the night before. Helping the old man had felt right, but now reality crept in. His alarm had gone off far too early, and soon he would be back at the warehouse, lifting boxes, clocking in hours that barely kept him afloat. He brewed a cheap cup of instant coffee, the bitter taste doing little to ease the heaviness in his body, then grabbed his jacket and stepped into the morning chill. The streets were already buzzing with life. People rushing, buses groaning to a stop, shopkeepers pulling up shutters. Marcus blended into it all, another face in the crowd, another man fighting to make it through the day. On the way to work, he thought about the old man's words. "You remind me of someone I used to know." That sentence kept circling in his head. The way the man had studied him, almost with recognition, had felt unusual. But Marcus shook it off. People said strange things when they were grateful, he told himself. Maybe the man was just trying to be polite. Still, there was something in his voice, a weight, like he meant more than what he had said. At the warehouse, Marcus slipped into his routine. The foreman barked orders, workers moved in rhythm, and the hours dragged by. His co-workers joked during breaks, but Marcus mostly kept to himself. He wasn't unfriendly, just quiet, focused. The younger guys often teased him for always being tired, always rushing to catch the night bus instead of hanging out after work. But Marcus had bills, responsibilities, and little room for mistakes. He couldn't afford to waste time. What none of them knew was that Marcus carried more than just the weight of boxes on his shoulders. His mother lived across town in a nursing home, her health fragile, her days uncertain. Every week, Marcus saved a little from his paycheck to visit her, bringing flowers or small things that might make her smile. He didn't tell anyone at work about it. He didn't want pity. He just wanted to be strong enough to keep going. As the day stretched on, Marcus felt the exhaustion from the night before sinking deeper. But when his shift ended and he stepped back into the cool evening air, something strange happened. Parked near the gate of the warehouse was a sleek black car, the kind you didn't usually see in his part of town. The driver, dressed in a dark suit, leaned against the hood, scanning the crowd. Marcus thought nothing of it at first, assuming it belonged to someone passing through. But then the man straightened, his eyes locking on Marcus. He stepped forward with purpose, holding a small envelope in his hand. "Marcus, right?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. Marcus froze. Few people outside of work knew his name. Yeah, that's me. Do I know you? The man shook his head. Not yet. But someone asked me to give you this. He held out the envelope. Marcus hesitated, then slowly took it. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind you'd expect for formal invitations or contracts. On the front, his name was written in neat handwriting. He glanced up to ask the man who had sent it, but the driver only gave a small nod and walked back to the car. Within seconds, the car pulled away, leaving Marcus standing in the lot with the envelope clutched in his hand. He turned it over once, twice, before carefully tearing it open. Inside was a folded note, the writing elegant and precise. Thank you for last night. You didn't just change my evening. You reminded me of something far greater. I would like to meet you again. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. at the Crescent Hotel. There was no signature. Marcus read the note 3 times, trying to make sense of it. His heart pounded as he remembered the old man. His glasses fogged. His hands trembling with the wrench. Had to be him. But why would someone like that invite him to a place like the Crescent Hotel? That hotel wasn't just expensive, it was the kind of place Marcus had only seen from a distance, the kind of place that seemed like another world compared to his. He folded the note carefully, slipping it into his backpack, and walked home with his mind racing. Questions filled his thoughts. What did the old man really want from him? Why hadn't he just given his name or number that night? And most of all, what could someone like Marcus possibly have to offer to a man who clearly lived in a different world? That night, Marcus barely slept. He kept picturing the old man's face, the way his eyes had lingered, like he saw something more than just a stranger. By morning, he had almost convinced himself not to go. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe he'd walk into something he wasn't prepared for. But deep down, curiosity pulled at him. He couldn't ignore the feeling that this was leading to something bigger. The following evening, Marcus stood outside the Crescent Hotel. His jacket cleaned as best as he could manage. His shoes polished though still worn. The building towered above him, its glass windows reflecting the sunset. People in suits and dresses walked past him, stepping out of shiny cars, their lives polished in ways Marcus couldn't imagine. He swallowed hard, clutching the strap of his backpack for courage, and stepped inside. The lobby was grand, filled with chandeliers and polished marble floors. Marcus felt out of place instantly, but the staff didn't stop him. One of them even approached, as if they had been expecting him, and guided him to a quiet lounge near the back. And there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea, was the old man. He looked different in the light. Still frail, still aged, but there was a certain dignity about him now, a calm strength that Marcus hadn't noticed before. The man's eyes lit up when he saw Marcus, and he motioned for him to sit. "Marcus," the man said warmly, as though they were old friends. "I was hoping you would come." Marcus sat down slowly, unsure of what to say. I wasn't sure if this was real, or why you wanted to see me." The old man smiled faintly. "You gave up your bus, your comfort, your time, just to help a stranger. That may not mean much to some, but to me it spoke volumes. People often look the other way. But you didn't." Marcus shifted uneasily in his seat. Compliments always made him uncomfortable, especially from someone he didn't understand. "Anyone would have done the same," he muttered. The man shook his head. "No, Marcus. Not anyone. And that's why I wanted to meet you again. Because I believe you're different." Marcus frowned slightly, the weight of the words settling on him. Different? In what way? He didn't feel different, just another man trying to survive. Before Marcus could respond, the old man leaned forward, his voice lowering as though what he was about to say carried importance. "There are things you don't know about me. Things I'll share with you soon. But first I need to know if you're ready to hear them. Because once I tell you, Marcus, your life will never be the same again." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the man across the table, the room around him fading into a blur. He had walked into this hotel unsure of what to expect, But now he realized he stood at the edge of something far greater than he could imagine. And as the old man's eyes locked on his, calm yet piercing, Marcus felt the weight of a future pressing in on him. A future that was no longer ordinary, no longer his alone. But what that future held he still had no idea. Marcus sat in silence, his hands resting uneasily on the table as the old man's words sank in. The hum of quiet conversations filled the hotel lounge, but for Marcus, the air felt heavier, like time itself had slowed. He wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but something in the man's steady gaze held him back. There was power there, not the kind that came from money or status alone, but something older, earned through years of experience, perhaps through struggles Marcus couldn't even imagine. The old man finally broke the silence. "My name is Charles Whitmore," he said simply, his voice calm yet deliberate. "I own Whitmore Industries." Marcus blinked, the name sparking recognition. He'd seen it before, on the side of delivery trucks, on billboards along the highway, even printed on some of the very boxes he moved at the warehouse. Whitmore Industries wasn't just any company. It was massive, stretching across cities, involved in everything from shipping to manufacturing. Marcus felt his throat tighten. This frail old man, who had been stranded with a flat tire the night before, owned all of that? You're that Whitmore?" Marcus asked, his voice unsteady. Charles nodded slowly, watching Marcus's reaction. "Yes, and I don't tell people that lightly. But I needed you to know who I really am, because what I'm about to say will make no sense otherwise." Marcus leaned back, his mind spinning. Why would a man like this bother with him? He was nobody, just a worker who scraped by day to day, invisible to most. He wanted to speak, but Charles continued. "When you stopped last night, you saw an old man with a problem. Nothing more. You didn't know my name, my wealth, or my power. You only saw someone in need, and you chose to help. Do you know how rare that is?" His words carried a weight that seemed to press down on Marcus's chest. People see value when it benefits them. You saw value when there was nothing to gain. Marcus shifted, uneasy under the intensity of the conversation. "I wasn't trying to prove anything," he said quietly. "It was just the right thing to do." Charles studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Exactly. And that is why I believe you may be the person I've been searching for." Marcus frowned. "Searching for? What do you mean?" The older man didn't answer right away. Instead, he sipped his tea, his hands trembling slightly before setting the cup down again. "There are things happening within my company, within my world, that are dangerous. Too many people are driven by greed, by power, and they've forgotten integrity. I built my empire from the ground up, but lately, I fear it's slipping into the hands of those who would use it for the wrong reasons. I need someone I can trust, Marcus. Someone with nothing to hide, no hidden agenda." Marcus stared at him, stunned. The idea seemed absurd. "Why me? I'm just a warehouse worker. I don't know anything about business or power, or whatever it is you're dealing with." Charles's eyes softened. Sometimes the strongest voices come from those who've lived without privilege. You see the world as it truly is, not through the lens of wealth. That perspective, Marcus, is worth more than money. The words stirred something inside Marcus, but they also terrified him. He didn't want to be dragged into something he didn't understand. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. What exactly was happening inside Whitmore Industries that made a man like Charles seek out help from someone like him? As if reading his thoughts, Charles leaned closer. "There are people, even within my company, who are not what they seem. Deals being made behind closed doors. Secrets that could destroy everything I've built. And if I make the wrong move, it won't just be me who suffers. Thousands of workers, families who rely on this company, could lose everything." Marcus's chest tightened. He thought about his own co-workers at the warehouse, the long hours, the paychecks that barely stretched to cover rent. If a company this large collapsed, the ripple effect would crush people like them first. But still, part of him couldn't shake the doubt. Why was Charles telling him all this? Why not confide in lawyers, advisors, or people who actually belonged in his world? As if to add to Marcus's unease, another figure entered the lounge. A tall man in a sharp suit, carrying a leather briefcase, walked straight toward Charles. His expression was polite, but his eyes were cold. He greeted Charles with a nod before glancing briefly at Marcus, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. "Mr. Whitmore," the man said smoothly, "I wasn't expecting you here." "Just a personal meeting," Charles replied, his tone neutral. "Nothing for you to worry about, Mr. Harrington." Marcus caught the brief tension between them, the way Harrington's jaw tightened before he forced a smile. He excused himself politely, but not without a final glance at Marcus, a look that carried more questions than words. When Harrington left, Charles exhaled slowly, almost as if the man's presence had unsettled him. "That is one of the men I was speaking of," Charles murmured. "Ambition can be useful in business, but in the wrong hands it becomes poison. And I fear that poison is spreading." Marcus felt the weight of the conversation pressing harder. He wanted to stand up, to walk away from this world that didn't belong to him. But something held him in place. Maybe it was the sincerity in Charles's voice, maybe the glimpse of danger in Harrington's eyes. Or maybe it was the unshakable sense that fate had pulled him into this moment for a reason. The evening stretched on, but answers remained scarce. Charles offered no specifics, only hints, shadows of something larger moving beneath the surface. He spoke of trust, of loyalty, of needing someone untouched by the corruption around him. And though Marcus tried to convince himself he wasn't that person, deep down, a small flame of responsibility began to flicker. When he finally left the hotel that night, Marcus walked through the city streets with his thoughts tangled. He had come expecting gratitude, maybe even a small gesture of thanks. Instead, he left with a burden he didn't ask for, a story unfinished, a mystery he couldn't ignore. And as he turned onto his street, Marcus felt the weight of unseen eyes on him. Somewhere in the shadows, he sensed he wasn't walking alone. What Marcus didn't know was that the decision he had made to stop and help a stranger had already placed him in the middle of a silent battle. A battle for power, for control, and for truth. And now, whether he was ready or not, he had become part of it. Marcus barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cold stare of Harrington, the calculating man who had interrupted his meeting with Charles Whitmore. The unease in Charles's voice still echoed in his head, and though Marcus wanted to push it away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into something far bigger than himself. He told himself he didn't belong in this world of polished suits, secret deals, and powerful companies. But something deep down told him that walking away wasn't an option anymore. The next day at the warehouse, Marcus tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting. He lifted boxes, moved pallets, and listened to the chatter of his co-workers, but it all felt distant. At one point, he noticed a black car parked near the far end of the street. It didn't belong to anyone from the warehouse, and though no one else seemed to notice, Marcus felt his stomach twist. Could it be a coincidence, or was someone watching him? Later that evening, Charles called him. The old man's voice was low, almost urgent. "Marcus, there are things moving faster than I expected. I need you to meet me again. Tonight. But be careful on your way here." The warning sent a chill through Marcus. He agreed, but as soon as the call ended, he felt the pressure closing in. Why him? Why was Charles confiding in a man who didn't even own a suit? And why did it feel like every step he took was being followed? When Marcus arrived at the hotel again, the air was different. Security guards stood taller, scanning the lobby with sharp eyes. Charles was waiting in a private room this time, his expression lined with worry. He motioned for Marcus to sit quickly. "There's something you need to know," Charles said, his voice urgent. "Harrington and others like him. They're planning something against me. They've been making moves in the shadows, waiting for me to step aside. And they think my time is almost over." Marcus swallowed hard. "What does that have to do with me?" Charles leaned forward. Because you're the one person they don't expect. You're not in their world, which means they can't predict you, can't control you. That makes you dangerous to them, and valuable to me. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He didn't want to be valuable. He wanted his quiet life, his routine, his visits to his mother. But the way Charles said it left no room for doubt. If Marcus had been invisible before, he wasn't anymore. Before Marcus could respond, the door to the room creaked open. Harrington stepped inside, his sharp smile masking the tension in his eyes. "Mr. Whitmore," he said smoothly, "we need to talk. Privately." His gaze flicked to Marcus, and his smile thinned. "This doesn't concern outsiders." Charles's hand gripped the edge of the table. "Marcus stays." The silence that followed was heavy. Harrington's eyes narrowed, but he didn't argue. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're making mistakes, sir. Big ones. Aligning yourself with the wrong people." His tone carried venom, and Marcus knew exactly who he meant. The room's air seemed to crackle. Marcus's heart thudded in his chest as Harrington's stare bored into him. He wasn't sure if it was a threat, but it felt like one. Charles remained calm, though his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his cane. "We'll continue this later," Charles said firmly. Harrington didn't protest, but as he turned to leave, he gave Marcus a look that made his skin crawl, a silent promise that this wasn't over. When the door closed, Marcus finally let out the breath he'd been holding. "Why do I feel like I just painted a target on my back?" he muttered. Charles looked at him with steady eyes. "Because you did. And I'm sorry for that. But you also carry something they can't buy. Your integrity. That's why they'll fear you." Fear. The word rattled Marcus. He was no fighter, no businessman. Just a man who had stopped to help change a tire. And yet here he was, sitting across from the head of a massive company, entangled in a conflict that stretched far beyond anything he understood. Over the next few days, Marcus noticed more shadows. Cars that seemed to linger a little too long. Strangers' eyes that lingered when he passed. Even at the warehouse, he felt the weight of unseen pressure. His co-workers noticed he was distracted, but he brushed it off, saying he wasn't sleeping well. At night, he replayed everything in his mind. The flat tire, the missed bus, the invitation to the hotel. Each moment seemed so small, yet they had chained together to bring him here, to a place where he felt both powerless and pivotal. The tension finally snapped when Marcus received another envelope. This time it wasn't elegant like the first. It was plain, shoved under his apartment door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Stay away from Whitmore. Last warning." Marcus's chest tightened as he read it over and over. Whoever had sent it knew where he lived. He wanted to crumple the note and throw it away, pretend it was nothing, but he couldn't. The danger was real now. He went to see Charles again, bringing the note with him. Charles's face darkened as he read it, his jaw tightening. "They're testing you," he said grimly. "Trying to see if fear will make you back down." Marcus slammed his fist lightly on the table. "I didn't ask for this. I'm just trying to live my life. I didn't want to get pulled into your battles." Charles met his eyes, his expression both weary and resolute. "I know. And yet you're here. Sometimes we don't choose the battles, Marcus. Sometimes they choose us." The words cut deep, and Marcus didn't know how to answer. He wanted to run, to disappear back into the quiet life he knew. But he couldn't. Not anymore. The simple act of stopping that night had changed everything, and no matter how hard he tried, there was no undoing it. The pressure built with every passing hour. Marcus sensed something coming, something big. And when Charles called him one final time, his voice shaking more than before, Marcus knew the climax of this storm was near. "Marcus," Charles whispered, his tone laced with urgency. "They're moving tonight. I need you to meet me. This could be the last chance we have to set things right." Marcus gripped the phone, his pulse racing. The noise of the city outside his window faded into silence. He knew whatever happened next would change everything. Not just for Charles, not just for Whitmore Industries, but for himself. And as he stepped out into the night, every shadow seemed alive, every sound a warning. The tension was unbearable, the air thick with the sense that something was about to break. Marcus didn't know what waited for him at the end of the road, but he knew one thing with certainty. The moment he had tried to avoid was here, pressing closer with every step, and there was no turning back. The bus station lights flickered above, casting long shadows across the pavement as David stood there, still trying to process what had just happened. The old man's cryptic words kept echoing in his mind, words that hinted at something bigger, something he hadn't yet understood. The storm had settled into a cold drizzle, and while most people hurried to their homes, David lingered, his chest heavy with questions. He had missed his bus, yes, but it felt like what he had stumbled into tonight was not an accident. The strange encounter with the old man had unlocked a door he didn't even know existed, and now he stood right at the edge of it. He thought back to the flat tire, to the way the man had insisted on thanking him, as if helping out a stranger was more than just kindness. It was a choice that mattered in ways he couldn't see yet. And when the man mentioned not forgetting this night, David had felt a chill that wasn't from the rain. He wondered if he should have asked more questions, maybe gotten his name, but the bus station had pulled him back to reality. He couldn't dwell too long. Tomorrow he had work, bills, and the same endless cycle of trying to survive. Yet for some reason, his instincts whispered that this night wasn't over, not by a long shot. The drizzle turned heavier, and David stepped under the cracked awning of the station, his mind spinning. He pulled out his phone, scrolling absent-mindedly through the job apps he always checked when he felt the weight of his dead-end shifts. He'd been applying for months, hoping for something stable, something that would finally lift him from barely getting by. Nothing ever came through. And now here he was, soaked, stranded, and clinging to a shred of hope that maybe, just maybe, the strange turn of events meant something more. But as the rain fell harder, David noticed something. Across the street, a black car sat parked under the dim glow of a streetlight. The engine hummed low, but the windows were tinted so dark he couldn't see inside. He dismissed it at first, probably just someone waiting to pick up a late arrival, but when the car didn't move after nearly half an hour, he started to wonder. His skin prickled. Why would anyone wait that long in a storm? When the last bus of the night finally pulled away without him, David crossed his arms against the cold and glanced back at the car. It was still there. He shifted uneasily. He told himself he was imagining things, that no one would be watching a man who had nothing, just a janitor trying to make it through the month. Still, something didn't feel right. And when he finally left the station to walk home, he couldn't shake the sense that the car followed him with its headlights off, just far enough behind to stay hidden in the rain. David's apartment was a small room in a run-down building on the edge of town, and he reached it soaked to the bone. He turned the key, glanced back at the street once more, and for a moment he thought he saw the faint outline of the black car parked at the corner. His stomach dropped, but when he blinked it was gone. He shook his head and laughed nervously to himself. Maybe he was just overtired. But the next morning things got stranger. When David arrived at work, still tired from the long walk home, his boss pulled him aside. "Someone came asking about you," he said, his brow furrowed. "Said they knew you. Asked about your schedule, where you lived. Didn't leave a name." David's chest tightened. He didn't know many people. Certainly no one who would bother showing up at his job. His boss shrugged it off, but David couldn't. His mind kept circling back to the old man with the flat tire. Could it be connected? Why would someone care about him, of all people? He wasn't rich, wasn't powerful, just another face in the crowd. And yet it felt like eyes were on him, like his simple life had been cracked open. Later that day, as David walked home, he saw it again, the same black car parked across from the corner store. This time the window rolled down slightly, just enough for him to see a hand lift a phone to someone's ear before the car pulled away. David froze. Whoever they weren't hiding anymore. That night, David couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building, every car passing outside made his nerves tighten. He replayed the moment with the old man over and over. Was he being tested? Watched? And then another thought struck him. What if the man hadn't been stranded by accident? What if the flat tire had been a setup, and David had walked straight into something he didn't understand? The following morning, as he sat at the bus stop, a stranger sat down beside him. He was sharply dressed, his suit perfectly pressed, his eyes scanning David in a way that felt calculated. After a long silence, the man leaned slightly toward him and said, "You should be careful who you help. Sometimes small choices change everything." Then, without another word, he stood and walked away, leaving David frozen in place. His pulse raced. The words felt heavy, almost like a warning. And though the man disappeared into the crowd, David knew deep down that nothing about his life would be the same again. Whatever he had stumbled into was only beginning, and the road ahead was darker and more tangled than he ever imagined. He couldn't stop wondering, who exactly was the old man with the flat tire, and why did helping him feel like the first domino in a chain reaction that was now spiraling out of his control? Would you like me to take the next part straight into the climax build-up, where David finally discovers the shocking truth about who the old man really is? Or should I first expand with more subplots that show how David's ordinary life keeps colliding with these strange, suspenseful twists? The air inside the room felt heavy, as though every word spoken had been waiting for this very moment. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the old man, his hands trembling as he held the truth that had been buried for so long. The silence was sharp, broken only by the sound of shallow breaths. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked but carried a weight that demanded attention. He explained how the CEO's collapse had not been a sudden tragedy, but the result of something overlooked, something everyone else had brushed aside. The cleaning lady had been the only one to notice the early signs, the subtle warnings no one else thought mattered. The words sent ripples through the room. People who had once dismissed her, who had walked past her every day without a second glance, now stood frozen in disbelief. The manager who had doubted her shifted uneasily, his confidence stripped away. The CEO himself, still pale but stronger now, looked at her with eyes filled not with power or pride, but with raw gratitude. The man who once commanded respect simply because of his position was now humbled by the woman who saved him without expecting anything in return. But then, just as the room began to settle, another revelation surfaced. The old man paused, his eyes lowering as if he was holding something even heavier. He revealed that what had happened was not just chance. It had roots in a decision made long ago, one that linked the CEO's hidden struggles to the very woman who saved him. The audience gasped, unsure what to believe, their curiosity pulling them deeper into the mystery. Whispers rose around the room, some doubting, some questioning, but all waiting for what would come next. The cleaning lady stood silently, her eyes glistening as she listened. She had never asked for recognition, never wanted her name to be in the spotlight, but now the truth was pulling her forward whether she was ready or not. She recalled the nights when she noticed him clutching his chest or leaning against the wall for support. Others thought it was just fatigue or stress, but she knew something was wrong. She carried the memory of someone close to her, someone who had been ignored until it was too late, and that memory had given her the instinct to act when no one else did. The tension reached its peak when the doctor confirmed the truth. He explained that the CEO's life had hung on a fragile thread and that if not for the cleaning lady's quick decision, he would not have survived the night. The weight of those words left everyone stunned. For years, the CEO had built his empire on sharp decisions, strategies, and numbers, but in the end, his survival had come from someone society often overlooked. The irony was not lost on anyone. Just as emotions swelled and relief began to settle in, a final twist shook the room. The old man revealed a document he had kept hidden, a record that tied the CEO's past to the woman's family in a way no one had expected. Years ago, a choice the CEO made had affected her life deeply, pushing her into struggles that had forced her to take on the very job that placed her here today. What once seemed like coincidence now appeared as fate, weaving their lives together in a circle of pain, resilience, and redemption. The CEO's eyes widened, his breath catching as the realization hit him. The woman who had saved him was also the one who had silently carried the weight of his past decisions. The room filled with an uneasy mix of shock and admiration. Some wondered if she would demand justice. Others feared she might expose everything. But instead of anger, she chose silence. Her quiet strength spoke louder than words, leaving the CEO to wrestle with the truth of his past and the weight of the debt he now owed her. The climax closed in with a raw intensity. One man humbled, one woman finally seen, and an entire room reminded that power, wealth, and status mean nothing in the face of humanity. The unexpected twist left everyone questioning their own choices, their own moments of ignorance, and whether they, too, had overlooked someone who might have been carrying more than they ever realized. Would you like me to now write the final resolution and emotional closing, where the story ends with lessons and takeaways that leave the audience deeply moved and satisfied? The air in the hospital room carried a calm weight now. The kind that comes after a storm has finally broken. The CEO sat upright in his bed, his face pale but steady, while the cleaning lady stood by the window, her hands clasped in front of her. For the first time in days, the chaos had settled, and the people who had once doubted her were now standing on the other side of the room with softened eyes and lowered voices. The story of how she had noticed the symptoms no one else cared to see had spread beyond the hospital walls, beyond the company, and even beyond the city. But inside this room, it wasn't about headlines or board meetings or the weight of business. This was about human lives and the fragile threads that hold them together. The CEO broke the silence first, his voice carrying the mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You didn't just save my life," he said, looking at her with an honesty that stripped away his usual armor. "You reminded me that I've spent years walking past people without really seeing them. I built an empire, but I forgot to build bridges with those who were always closest." His words, raw and unpolished, made the people around him shift uncomfortably. The board members who had spent years admiring his decisiveness now looked at him like they were seeing another side, one they had never thought possible. The cleaning lady lowered her gaze, not out of shyness, but because she had never been one to seek attention. She replied quietly, "Sometimes it takes a moment like this for people to remember what really matters. None of us are invisible, sir. We all notice things, we all feel things. It just depends on whether anyone cares to listen." Her words struck harder than any formal speech could have, because they carried truth that couldn't be polished away. In the days that followed, the company went through a quiet transformation. The CEO, once known for his distant demeanor, began walking the halls with slower steps, greeting people by name, listening instead of just speaking. Employees whispered about the change, some skeptical, some hopeful. But the cleaning lady knew the truth. He had faced something that stripped him bare, and it had left a mark deeper than any business failure ever could. The board, too, wrestled with their own discomfort. They had built their lives around profits, deadlines, and strategies, but now they were confronted with a reminder that behind every polished glass door was a person carrying their own silent struggles. One member confessed privately that he had been too busy chasing numbers to notice the people working in the corners of the building, the ones who made it possible for everything else to run smoothly. The incident had forced them to see what they had ignored for too long. For the cleaning lady, life didn't suddenly transform into wealth or recognition. She returned to her routines, her quiet shifts, her evenings spent at home with her family. But something had shifted inside her too. For years she had told herself that her role didn't matter beyond keeping things clean. Now, she realized she had saved a man's life simply because she cared enough to notice what others dismissed. That realization gave her a quiet strength, one that couldn't be taken away. The media, hungry for a story, tried to spin the moment into headlines about unlikely heroes and shocking twists. Cameras waited outside her door, reporters begged for her words. But she declined each time, saying only, "I don't need cameras to tell me what I did. I just want people to remember to look at each other." That refusal, oddly enough, made her story even more powerful. People began to talk, not about the company's profits or the CEO's reputation, but about how one person's attention to humanity could change the course of someone's life. The CEO faced his own battles in recovery. Nights were long, filled with the echo of monitors and the weight of reflection. He thought back to the countless times he had walked past her in the building without so much as a glance. He remembered how he had once believed strength was about power and money, when in truth, strength was often hidden in humility and compassion. That realization reshaped him, and though he would still carry the mantle of leadership, he vowed never to return to the blindness that had nearly cost him everything. Weeks later, when he returned to the office for the first time, the atmosphere was different. The staff gathered quietly, not with forced applause, but with genuine warmth. He didn't walk past them this time. He stopped, spoke, asked, listened. At the end of the day, he walked into the janitorial room where she was gathering her supplies and said, "I want you to know, I will never forget. You gave me back more than life. You gave me back sight." She didn't respond with big words, just a smile and a nod, because she knew he meant it. Outside the walls of the company, people who heard the story carried it into their own lives. Some started noticing their neighbors more, some began conversations they had long avoided, and some found the courage to stand up when something didn't feel right. The story wasn't about a CEO or a cleaning lady anymore. It became about everyone who realized that no act of care is ever too small, and no person is ever too insignificant to make a difference. The final twist came quietly, not with drama but with meaning. A letter arrived at the cleaning lady's home one morning, signed by the CEO himself. Inside was not money or gifts, but an offer for her children, full scholarships for their education, with a promise that they would never face the limits she had endured. He wrote, "You saw me when no one else did. Now let me make sure your children are always seen." She held that letter in her hands, tears filling her eyes, not because of what it promised, but because it showed her that the man had truly changed. In the end, the story wasn't about class, titles, or wealth. It was about sight, the kind of sight that goes beyond the surface, the kind that notices a tremor in a hand, or the weariness in someone's eyes, or the quiet strength in a person others overlook. It was about how fragile life is, and how powerful compassion can be when it's given space to matter. As the city moved on and the headlines faded, the memory of that day remained alive in the people who carried the lesson forward. It reminded them that the smallest act of awareness can ripple into something larger than anyone expects. And it left behind a truth both simple and unshakable. In a world filled with noise and speed, sometimes the most extraordinary thing you can do is to stop, notice, and care. That was the real ending, the one no headline could capture. Not just a life saved, but a reminder of what it means to truly see one another.